Some Saints and Rams in a second, but first, all right, Thursday Night Football highlights. Curtis Samuel making the adjustment for a nice 44-yard catch.
It's kind of unbelievable, Canty, how many chunk plays the Panthers had that none of them resulted in touchdowns.
Yeah, and it looks like Cam Newton underthrew a couple of them, especially to Curtis Samuel. He had a step on the defender. All he had to do was get it out there, push it a little more down the field. Maybe it's a catch-and-run opportunity, but Curtis Samuel has to slow down, lets the defender catch up.
All right, more from this one. Jameis Winston throwing a perfect ball to Mike Evans in stride for 41.
Going into last night's game, Jameis Winston had lost 12 consecutive road games, so it's good to see the quarterback being able to figure out a way to give his team an opportunity to win a game on the road.
Jameis had the one throw that Kuechly almost intercepted, but after throwing the ball to the opposition repeatedly against the Niners, Jameis played really, really well. And it was a critical game for him because people would be questioning his status as the starter if he repeated that performance.
All right, Greg Olsen pulling in the one-handed spinning catch right here.
G-Reg consistently still, year 13, one of the best. But this is another one of the balls you're talking about, Canty, in that, I mean, this is just an easy throw that's missed. That takes a spectacular catch when it should.
Yeah, a couple of passes sailed on Cam, a few that were behind the receiver, including that one. I mean, Cam was inaccurate the whole night. Now, part of that is the shoulder, but a part of that is because he can't step up in the pocket.
Oh. Here we go. San Diego High School basketball 9th grader Mikey Williams finishes with a nice
Ninth grader? Ninth grader?
9th grade.
He kind of remind me of me. That's how I was in 9th grade. Getting a little air out there.
Oh, I mean, man, tape.
Well, I am 6'8", though, Nick. Come on. If I'm not dunking in 9th grade, there's probably a problem.
Yeah, okay, yeah, but you wouldn't. I can't even be lying, man.
If you guys liked last season's NFC Championship game, you will love the 425 game on Fox this weekend. That is a rematch of that one. It's Saints, it's Rams, it's last season's game, which now lives in infamy because of arguably the biggest blown pass interference call in the history of the game. The one that cost the Saints their season. The one that caused a rule change this offseason. Here's what Drew Brees had to say when asked if he's gotten over that blown call.
Still haven't, never will. But when you say forgotten about it, I mean, you know, you have to find a way to compartmentalize it to the point where, you know, you can move on in a positive way. And so I found a way to do that. But as far as just, you know, the events, you know, you live and learn, and you know, sometimes things don't go your way, and you got to find a way to come out better on the other side. We can put together all the storylines we want. I mean, bottom line is, they're a really, really good football team. They have the same goals and aspirations we do. You know, we just happen to be the two teams last year that were, you know, kind of at the top and had a chance to play in that NFC Championship game to go to the Super Bowl. You know, unfortunately, that one didn't go our way.
So you would have to imagine just about every man on the Saints is going to use what happened last year as fuel going into this season. You almost want them to. Let it be a little bit of revenge. Do you think that could help them in any way?
Well, sure, to a degree, and I think the Saints will win this game. But real quick, Drew Brees and the Saints got to get over this. Like, enough. And by the way, and I understand you only get so many opportunities, and I understand if you're Drew Brees, the difference given his amazing statistical profile between being a one-time Super Bowl champion and a two-time Super Bowl champion is the difference between being considered one of the 10 to 15 best quarterbacks ever, and people saying, wait, is he top 5? Where is he on the mountain? I get all of that. But that game didn't end on that non-call. The Saints got the ball in overtime, and Drew Brees promptly threw an interception. I don't know how much of that he has gotten over, that they had their opportunity. And there is nothing to say that getting to the Super Bowl is not what they were trying to do last year. Trying to win the Super Bowl. There's nothing to say what Bill Belichick and the Patriots did to the Rams they wouldn't have done to the Saints. Now, I don't think they would have, but we don't know. But as far as this game, I think the Saints are better than the Rams. I think the Saints, after struggling for a half against Houston, Canty, are going to pick up where they left off in the second half against Houston, which was excellent on both sides of the ball. The Deshaun Watson two-play touchdown drive notwithstanding, and Drew Brees was great in the second half of that game. So I do think the Saints can go to Los Angeles and beat a team they beat in New Orleans in the regular season last year before losing in the postseason. But I think after this game, please, at the very least, we can leave that NFC Championship game in the past.
You can't leave it in the past. I know it sounds good, but human nature is to lament the opportunities that you didn't take advantage of. I mean, I still remember the times when I lost in playoff games. 2006 with the Dallas Cowboys up in Seattle, Tony Romo fumbles the snap, tries to run it in, gets tackled by Jordan Babineau. 2007, 13-3, #1 seed in the NFC, hosting the divisional round of the New York Giants, ended up losing that game. The Giants go on to beat the undefeated Patriots in the Super Bowl. 2014, I'm with the Baltimore Ravens. Got a double-digit lead in Foxborough, and we ended up losing that game.
Let it go,
Those are the
Canty.
ones that you remember. I don't remember the Super Bowl run. I remember those games. But, I mean, in terms of what Drew Brees and the rest of the Saints are feeling, I mean, could you have a more heartbreaking playoff loss than they've had the last two years? Think about the divisional round in Minnesota 2 years ago, and then last year in the NFC Championship game. But going back to last year's game, you're right, Nick. They had opportunities in that game coming out of the 2-minute warning. For some reason, Sean Payton calls a pass play rather than running the ball, knowing that the Rams only have 2 timeouts left. I mean, you could run the clock down and kick a field goal, then you kick off and you force the Rams to drive the length of the field to try to get in field goal range. And at worst, they end up kicking a field goal and tying it, and you're going to overtime.
But you got the ball in overtime. Like you had, this was not what happened with Kansas City, where it goes to overtime, you lose the coin flip, and you never see the football. Like, not only did you get the ball, you got the ball, and Drew Brees, as great as he was last year, threw a pick, threw a bad pick. That was, now, we can argue if the pass interference call is made, they go to the Super Bowl, but that's also not a guarantee. They have to make a kick. The Rams would have had probably about 25 seconds, see if they can get their superstar kicker in range. But to spin it forward to this week's game, it should be noted, last year's game did determine the 1 seed.
Yes.
Now, the 1 seed did end up determining who went to the Super Bowl, because obviously the Rams lost, but the Rams lost in the regular season and then went to New Orleans and won. But both these teams last year were 13-3. The reason New Orleans was the 1 seed and the Rams were the 2 seed was this regular season game. I'm not saying history is necessarily going to repeat itself, but when these two teams are only going to play each other once all year because they're not divisional foes, the head-to-head tiebreaker is a critical one. It's not just about who's going to get to 2-0. It's about the end of the year, if they're both 12-4, who gets the 2 seed versus the 3, maybe who gets the 1 versus the 2 again. So the critical nature of this game is enormous, and I need to see from the Rams, can Todd Gurley play a full game? Because in the week 1, he was non-existent in the first half, quite good in the second half.
Really good fourth quarter.
And maybe,
they had the lead, yeah.
And maybe that's how they're going to use him this year, where he's going to be on a pitch count early in games. To beat a team as good as New Orleans, I think you're going to need a fully functional Todd Gurley for 4 quarters, not just a quarter and a half.
Yeah, completely agree, because New Orleans is one of the more complete teams in the NFC, and so you're going to need Todd Gurley because, I mean, that offense is a different offense when he's out there on the field and he's a threat to get the ball. But in looking at, this matchup in week 2, you asked the question, Jenna, are they going to exact some kind of revenge out in L.A. this weekend? Well, I mean, I don't think they can get any revenge because they can't get to the Super Bowl the following weekend. All they can do is try to position themselves amongst the contending teams in the NFC. And if you could somehow, some way find a way to be one of those top 2 teams in the NFC, well, it's always better to be one of 8 teams competing for a championship rather than 1 of 12. So, I mean, I think that's what New Orleans should have on their mind. That should be the focal point, because I do believe the Rams are a team that's going to be there in December when we're talking about the playoffs. It's just that when you go on the road, you got to focus on the execution. I'm really interested to see how that Saints defense does, because they weren't great in terms of being able to stop the run against Houston. You realize that Sean McVay is going to give them a heavy dose of that out in L.A.
Last year, going into this game, we talked about how these are 2 teams that were fairly evenly matched. They didn't lose a ton of players over the offseason. Which team resembles more the team that we saw last year between these 2?
Oh, I think you're right that they are both very similar. And the Saints now, they don't have Mark Ingram anymore, and that's a substantial loss. The Rams lost a couple offensive linemen and Ndamukong Suh, and we'll see how substantial those losses are. But the major players from last year and this year are similar. I would say a distinction is in last year's game, the Rams had already lost Cooper Kupp.
Yes.
And now the Saints are going to have to account for that. You mentioned something about the Saints defense. I just want to follow up, because this is obviously where you made your money on the defensive line. How good is the Saints pass rush, or was what we saw in week 1, more sacks than any team in the league in week 1, 11 quarterback hits? To you, was that more about Marcus Davenport and Trey Henry, Cam Jordan, those guys really playing a great game, or was that more about the Texans' offensive line just being disastrous? Because how duplicable is that going into this Rams game?
No, I think it's more about the Saints' defensive line being really good at being able to get after the quarterback. I mean, the Houston Texans have an improved offensive line, and we saw that based on the production that they had in their ground game.
Sure.
But I think that Saints defense is really good at getting after the passer, and that's exactly what you want when you have a high-powered offense like the Saints do with Drew Brees and company. So if they can somehow dictate the complexion of this game early and put it on Jared Goff's shoulders, force him to drop back and throw it, well, now Sean Payton has the Rams exactly where he wants them. So that's something to watch early in this game.
If they get a half dozen sacks again, they'll win this game going away. Like, they don't even need that level of defense.